All right. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending where you are. And welcome to another Okta Workflows online meetup. Let's see, I'm going to wait a few seconds for folks to join, and then we'll go ahead and get started. All right. So I see people are joining. Very good. Okay. So let's get started. So welcome again. My name is Max Katz, and I do everything Okta Workflows community and education. So today's meetup is getting started with Okta Workflow. So we're going to build the flow, and as we build the flow, we're going to cover the fundamentals of building with Okta Workflows. Now, specifically, what we're going to do today is we're going to build a flow that does the following. It will, when a user is added to an application, we're going to read the user information, then create a message, and then notify the user. The read user and the create message, those are kind of details, but at a high level, a person is added to an application, and then we'll notify that person, hey, you now have access to this application. Okay, so this event is being recorded, and the replay will be available right after we end the session. I will also upload this tomorrow, actually not today, later today, to YouTube. Tomorrow, I'll send a message with the link to YouTube and other resources to Workflows. If you would like, please share in the chat where you're joining from. I think it's always interesting to know where folks are joining from. And I'm joining from the Bay Area. If you attended meetups, then you probably know my location. So before we start, also last thing is that follow our Crowdcast channel. So in the upper, I think it's kind of upper right corner, there is a button to follow us. And then you'll be notified when we go live for any future events. And lastly, if you have any ideas for future topics, please let me know. My email in the first column. I also want to say, so this is now the getting started events are now, I created like a series of events. And so this is the first one in November. I believe it's every first Tuesday of the month. There's one in December, and then there's one in January, and I'll schedule other events for next year as well. So, and we'll of course build a different flow every time, right? So the getting started is now a monthly event. And again, they're all listed on the Crowdcast channel. Okay. Let me see here. All right. Well, let's get started. Let me share my screen. Let me move this. All right. Okay. So let's start by building the flow. And again, the flow is we will notify user when they are given access to an application. All right, so this is my folder right here. Now you can see I have a lot of folders here on the left. You can create folders, you can create subfolders, so you can organize your flows as you need. Now, before I jump, let me just give you a quick overview of the dashboard. So I'm in the Flows tab, but here, if you go to Home, this is probably where you're going to end up. You know, this is your first time. So they got some videos here, and there's some templates right here that you can try. And then there are resources. So there are all the educational resources that you need to get started with Okta Workflows. So there are links here. Now the flows, this is where your folders and flows are. Connections, so these are your connections to external services, and we're going to cover this as we build the flow. And finally, there are also these templates. So these are pre-built flows that you can add and run and see how they work. So this is kind of an overview of the dashboard. So let's go back to flows. And I'm in this folder, first flow, and then today's date. Let me scroll here. So I'm right here. All right. So first, we're going to create a new flow. And just click the button to create new flow. And we created a new flow. Now we're going to give it a name. And let's call this notify when new application added. And then you can give an optional description. You can say, so notify user when new application is added. And then I'm also going to save this all data. So this will help me with running the flow. And so not really running the flow, but it will save the execution. So when I run the flow each time, it will save those executions, and I can actually go back and see, oh, this execution, this is the data for this execution, this is the data for this execution. So it's really helpful for, again, testing and debugging the flow. And I'm going to click save. All right. Now, you can always go back if you want to change the name. Of course, you can go back, click on the little pencil next to the name. And again, you can uncheck this if for some reason you don't want this. All right. But we have a flow, and then with a name. Now, usually the first step when you're building a flow is how do you invoke the flow, right? How do you trigger the flow? So what needs to happen for the flow to run? So there are a number of ways you can trigger a flow. I would say the two most common. So the first one is when an event happens in your system or your organization, right? That's what we're going to be using. So the event in our case is going to be when an application is added. Now, to see what events are available, you would click here. Now you would select a connection or a connector to a service and see what events are available for that specific connection or a connector. Now we're going to be using Okta, but you can see there are other connectors you can use. And again, every connector is going to have different events it supports. But let me just show you Okta. As you can see, Okta has a large list of events that it supports. Now, the one we're going to be using is, let's see, application, maybe added, or user edit. Wait, what's the, I can't even find the application. we'll find it. Oh, okay. Well, here's what I'm going to do. Forget the name, but let's go back. Let's save the change. So I see a message in, if you can't hear for some reason, sometimes what it helps if you reload the browser, the Crowdcast window. Oh, thank you, user assigned application. Sorry, I was going to look at the flow that I already built. User, so I'm going to select Okta, user assigned. Here we go. I think, yeah, if you search for application, you get other events. But anyhow, so this is the event we're going to use, right? And then this is, click on the event. Now, before I configure this event, so this is the first option. And let me delete. I'm going to go back for a sec and show you. Let's say you want to use, let's say Google Sheets. So this one supports only one event. So when a new row is added. Okay. So again, every connector is going to support a different set of events. Now, so this is the first way you can trigger a flow, is when an event happens. The other very common way is on schedule. And then we go back to the same, and then schedule over here. So this is, you can configure the flow to run periodically. So it can be as often as every 5 minutes, every hour, day, every week, and so on, right? So as you can see, once you add this, you can configure the schedule. All right, I see the audio is working. Very good. Yeah, sometimes reloading the page helps. So those are the two most common ways, I would say, the event and the schedule. Now, the other also very common ways is an API endpoint. So you can trigger an API endpoint, which will in turn call a flow. So that's another way. Now, and yet another way is if you have a helper flow. So a helper flow is when a flow calls another flow. All right, so that's also very common. If you're working with lists, you'll use helper flow. So I would say those four, and there are other ways. There are even more ways you can call a flow, but those are the two most common. So event, schedule, API, and helper flow. Okay, and there are other online meetups where we cover the other options as well. So if you I'll include the link in the message, but if you go to our YouTube playlist, you will see those events. But let's go back to our the event that we want to use for this flow, and I need to, so it's user assigned. Again, thank you, Andy, for putting this in the chat. Okay, now again, every event is going to be different. This one you have to configure. You have to set some options. And I'm going to say, no, I don't want to use an actual instance ID. I want to use the application name. So in this example, we want to use Salesforce. So we're going to assign a user to Salesforce. All right, so I select the application, and then I only have one instance. So I'm going to select that, and I'm going to save. Right? So this is the event. So now when this happens, this event will trigger the flow, and then all this information will be available to me. So you can see there's a lot of information. Now, what I usually do is when I use an event, this is already enough for me to test the flow and just kind of see how it works, right? So what I do is I'm going to click save, right? And then right here you can see it says right now it's off. So I'm going to open it, and I'm going to turn it on. Now you can see right here, you can also the save all data. You can also turn this on or off here as well. If you remember, we checked when we named the flow, there was this option as well. All right, let's turn the flow on. All right, and I'm going to run it in just a second. Sometimes with events, it takes a few seconds, maybe a little bit longer for the flow to kind of register to get activated. So sometimes you want to wait. But if I go to execution history, right? So this is where I'm going to see different runs of the flow. And because I'm saving the data will be saved within run. So I can see, oh, this is the data we used for this run. This is the data that was used for this run, all right? But let's go to the dashboard, right? So if you need to go to your admin, Okta admin dashboard. And let's see, let me just refresh here. And I'm going to go to applications. And I've got some applications. I'm going to select Salesforce. And I've got one user. And I'm going to add another user to this application. And let's do with Stella Green. So I'm going to assign Stella Green to Salesforce. I'm going to click Assign. And I'm going to say Save and go back. All right. So Stella was assigned. And I'm going to go back to my flow. And again, it takes sometimes a little bit of time. Sometimes what I do is I'll go to flow and I'll come back. And we can see now we have this execution. And we can see that the data that was passed, well, not passed, but it's available as part of the event. But this indicates, hey, that this event is working, right? And now I can continue building the flow, okay? And again, looking at the event here specifically, you can see there's the person who did the assignment. It was the admin, and then the actor user. So you can see there's information about Stella, and then email and the display name. All right. So now the next step is we got the event information. Now we're also going to get more information about the user. Now, sometimes the event has all the information that you need, okay? But sometimes you might need to get more information about the user, right? And so I think if we go back, we might have all the information we need. We have the user's email, but just for the practice of learning how to deal with workflows, let's add an extra step here. All right, and we're going to read the user information. Okay, so now this is the next step. Now you can see there are two options here. There's app action, and then there is function. Now, the app action, right? These are cards where you interact with applications or web services, right? So these are different connectors that are available, out-of-the-box connectors, and then you can call different actions available from these connectors, right? So you can see there's a list, right? Now, if something is not available here, so there are about 50, 55 plus connectors available out of the box. if something is not available, then you can also call the whatever service you want to use directly, right? So you can set up the call yourself. So that's of course an option as well. Now, in our case, we're going to use Okta because we're going to read the user information, right? And I'm going to search read, and I'm going to do read user, right? And now every card is going to be different, every action card. Now, in this case, there's an input, which is the login, and then we can see there's a lot of output information. So some of them are checked, some of them are not. So I'm going to click save, and then, okay, so this is the input. So every card usually will have input and then output. Now, you scroll here, it's like, I don't need all this information. So what you can always do is click the gear and then choose fields and then configure the card again. And say, I don't, well, I guess we don't need this. So we can then check all this information. But what we do want is, let's say we want a username, first name, last name, primary email, and I think this is display name, all right? And then save. So every card you can sort of configure it depending on the card, of course. All right. So next it requires an ID. And so we know that we actually get the ID from here. We can go to history. And if I scroll and then see the Okta user, right, I can see that the ID is here. So I can use this ID, right? So we can see the Okta user. I'm going to scroll down, Okta user, and then I'm going to take the ID and just connect it like this, right? So this is one of my favorite capabilities in workflows, is the ability to pass data from card to card. So I'll show it to you again. I'm going to delete this. I'm going to take the ID and connect it, all right? All right. Now, before you run the flow again, you can test each card. And then right here, there's a test card, right? Now, the first time we did a test, we actually tested the entire flow with just one card. Now, let's go back to execution history. And we need the ID of the user. So I'm going to go here. Let me just open my, all right. So I'm just checking if there are any questions. I'm going to copy the ID and go back, and now I can test. Now I can enter the ID. So this is testing just this card, and click test. And I get information. Oh, Stella doesn't have a display name. Okay, that's fine. But this is how you can test the card, and I highly recommend you test individual cards before you test the entire flow. All right. All right. So this works, and then so the next step is to create a message. All right. And so as I said, the action is where you interact with that external services and applications. Now, on the other hand, the function option, these are cards that allow you to interact with data and change data, create data, and manipulate data. So they're divided into categories. There's the branching for like if else, error handling. There's text, numbers, true, false, working with objects and lists. But again, it allows you to manipulate data, create data, and so on. Now, the one we want is the compose, right? So it's a card that allows you to write text. So and here I'm gonna write. So I'm gonna say hi. And what I'm gonna do is I'm going to now take the first name and I'm gonna drag and drop it into the card like this, okay? And then good news, you now have access to. Now, in the application name, if I go here, it's application. But I can always go to execution history again. And if I'm not sure, I can look and application, open. And then, so this is the display name. So I'm going to use the display name. And application, I'm going to display name, right? and I can say, have fun, something like this, all right? All right, so I created the text. I mean, you can even test this if you would like, and you can say Max and then Salesforce, right? So those are the inputs, and then this is how it looks. This is how the message looks, right? Another thing you can do is you can see the default output is actually called output, but I also recommend as you're building a flow is to rename these. So there's the more, if you come back to a flow, so has more context and meaning. And to do that is you can click the little, this is the type of the field, and go to customize, and you can rename this, and you can say email message. All right. All right, now the last step is we want to send an email, and for this we're going to use the Gmail connector. All right, so because this is a service, I'm going to click App Action, right, and I'm going to just delete the read here, and I'm going to use Gmail. Now, one thing I didn't mention, I've been talking about these services and connectors and connections, but I haven't shown you any. Now, for Okta is right here. Right, so I'm using a connection to Okta. Mine is called Okta Preview, and so you have a connector, and then you can have multiple connections, right? So it's right here as well. Now you can have a connection to a development environment, maybe a testing environment, and a production environment, right? So you have a connector, and then you can have multiple connections. So let me show you how you create one for Gmail. So Gmail. So first of all, the action that I want to use is called send email. Now I already have a connection, but let's say I want to create a new one. So I'm going to select this drop down. And of course, if you didn't have a connection, it would ask you to create one because you can't use the card without it. I'm going to new connection, and I'm going to say Gmail2, and then I'm going to create. Now, every connector is going to have a different setup process, right? So this one, I'm sort of giving Okta Workflow access to my Gmail account, and I'm going to select the account, and then the permissions here, I'm going to say allow. Right? So now you can see I have a Gmail2. Right? As for options, again, every card is going to be different. This one, do you want to send as HTML? We're not going to worry about HTML in this example. We're just going to click save. And now we got the fields here. Right? Now I'm looking at this like I don't want to set the from, the CC, and the BCC. So as before, I can click the gear. Let me see here. I see where does the message go? Email. So yeah, I'm gonna set the message. Sorry, I was looking at the questions, but yeah, the message is gonna be sent via the Gmail card. So, but I don't need these fields, and then I'm gonna click the gear again, and I'm gonna say choose fields, and I don't need the from, I don't need the CC or the BCC. I do want the subject and the body, and I'm gonna click save. Right? So now the two, I'm going to take the user's primary email, and I'm going to connect it to the Gmail card. The subject, I'm going to say new application, okay? And then the body, I'm going to take the body like here, all right? So now I can test the Gmail card, and we can click test. We can enter the the email. Let me just copy it so I don't make a mistake. So again, I go back. Now these cards are empty because the execution only had this card. So and I added these cards after the run. So that's why they're blank. But the Okta user, let's get here Stella. Copy this. Go back. Let's test. Let's enter the email. Hi Stella. And this is enough. I'm going to click test. All right, this is just the message ID. And then I'm going to click close. Now I'm going to go back, not back, but I'm going to open this tab, which shows me, all right, and right here, I just received the email that I sent, right? So you can test the Gmail card as well. All right. Well, good. We are ready to test the entire flow. right? So I'm going to save, and our flow is on, and the data saving is on. And let's run this. So I'm going to go back to my dashboard. Oh, this is the docs. I'm going to come back to this in a second, but let's get, so Stella was assigned. Let's remove Stella, and we'll assign Stella again. So assign. All right, done. And let's go back to the flow here, and let's go to execution. And we can see there's a second execution now. And so we can see this is the event card. The next card, we're reading the user information. Now we're creating the message, and then we're sending the message. And you can see how data is passed from card to card. And there are also the connections are shown if you hover over the field. And then if I go to the email, back to mailbox, this is the email that just was sent. All right, and we can see, hey, Stella, that you now have access to Salesforce. All right. So, we built the flow, and we're able to test the flow, and it works. Now, one thing I didn't show you as I was building this is I want to show you this. There's this icon. There's this next to the testing a card. There's this question mark icon, which I use all the time, and this is the help. So when you add a card and you maybe not sure how it works exactly, so click this icon, and it opens the help, and it tells you how the card. It opens the docs for the card, and it tells you how the card works. It describes the inputs. It describes the outputs. So I use it all the time. All right. So this is the read user. So yeah, and if you want, you can also open it in a full window if you would like. So again, I encourage you to use that, and I use this option all the time to understand, kind of learn how the car works. And then, for example, this is the compose one. All right. I also want to go back, talk about the connectors again, but also the docs in general, because again, as I said, in addition to the help for each card, I also use just the docs. But the connectors, let me go back for a second. And so this page, this has all the connections that you've created. Now, for Gmail, you can see, so there's a connector to Gmail, and then I have two connections, right? This is the one that I had before, and then the Gmail is the one I created as I was building the flow, right? Now, let me go back to the docs. Is that, again, I'm spent a lot of time here, but let's say you're looking, you could click on the question mark, but you want to just read about the connector in general. So on the left-hand side, there's connectors, right? And you get a list of all the available connectors. So let's choose a different one, like box, right? And every connector will have a very similar format, if not identical, is that the authorize your box account is how do you create a connection to the service, all right? So this goes into explaining how to do that. That there's some known issues and limitations, and again, every connector is going to be different. But then it has the events section, and so these are the events based on which you can invoke a flow, right? So this is specifically for the box connector. So if you want to call a flow when a file is moved, you can do that, or a file is uploaded, right? So these are all the events that the connector supports, and then the actions. These are all the actions that the connector supports. Okay, so the event is the first card, and then the actions, it's all the other steps in the flow. So these are all the actions that the connector supports. So, for example, creating a user, deleting a file, deleting a folder, and so on. Right? Now, every connector, the custom API action, if there's a if you see an API that you want to call, but it's not listed here, then this is where you use the API, the custom API action. This is where you specify the endpoint yourself or manually, right? And again, there are other meetups that we did where we cover this. So if you go to the YouTube playlist, you should see those. All right. All right. Let me just look at my notes. So go back to the flow. All right. Well, I think I covered everything I wanted to cover, right? We built a flow and we covered the fundamentals, how to invoke a flow, then how to build a flow, the action cards, and then there are function cards, and how to test a card, and then how to test the entire flow, and then how to use how to customize the card via this gear, but also then how to invoke a help and see how the card works, and then the general docs as well. All right, so let me go back. Let me know if there are any questions, and I'll open right here. All right. Well, I don't see any questions, but let me show you this again. The first slide that I was showing. So my email is there. So if you have any questions after the event, please feel free to email me. If you have any ideas for topics, please let me know. But other than that, thank you for joining. Again, this is recorded, and the recording will be available right after I end the session. It will be on YouTube tomorrow, and I'll send a message with some resources and the link to YouTube as well. And again, thank you for joining us today. Bye-bye.